Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us today. I'm Elsa, the head of Strategic Partnerships team of Encore Travel. We are very proud to bring to you a second edition of this quarterly webinar. Our first shot at it was in September. Remember that time when we wanted to believe that COVID couldn't possibly have another wave? Well, we are now already ending it, waiting for the third one to come with resilience and strength, and also with hope that vaccines will be an antidote, not just for our people, but for our beautiful industry as well. At Encore, we focus on travel, more precisely on corporate travel. This leads us to deliver expertise in unexpected areas of the businesses of our Canadian and US clients. We are the trusted advisors should you want to implement a duty of care program, benchmark your travel and expense policy, increase program adoption, or put plans in action to generate savings and optimize your travel budget. The heat of the pandemic gives us the chance to undertake projects that we were waiting to have bandwidth to properly execute. The implementation of a new reporting platform, an innovative automation system for our agents, or also the addition of new products in our portfolio, such as airline credits tracking, and an improved communication plan to make sure you stay well informed about everything you need should you travel soon or not. Travel management has always value to be looked at, even today, and you can count on us to make sure we can make the most out of all the opportunities out there to improve your programs. Our gathering today also celebrates the 34th anniversary of Encore. 34 years of growth and innovation alongside our clients. Putting people first has always been the Encore's philosophy and will continue to guide our actions as we get through these times. COVID-19 is a huge challenge, but we'll face it and overcome it, just as we did when faced with SARS or September 11th. Happy anniversary, Encore Travel, and cheers to another 34 successful years. It is my pleasure to once again introduce you to Fred Gatali, a priceless asset within the Strategic Partnerships team. Fred holds the position of Analyst for Client Solution and Insight. He's our expert to track opportunities and draw trends to support his colleagues of the account management team be on top of innovative solutions to improve the quality and relevance of your travel programs. Fred is the brain behind our team, and we wouldn't possibly be able to do what we do without him. Today's session covers interesting trends observed over the past year and decodes what they mean for the future of travel. What does the industry look like today? What motivates or restrains the travelers to and from hitting the road? What the travel experience will look like in the coming month, and our insights into how the industry will react from a service standpoint. Throughout this period together, Fred will be going through various statistics from renowned sources such as IATA, the International Air Transport Association, as well as delivering his own comprehension from a multitude of specialized articles. We even have a little mission for you, so keep your cell phone at hand, but we'll go through that with you when will be the time. A little housekeeping before we jump into it. This session is recorded and will be shared in our next newsletter next week. We took care of muting your microphone not to disturb the course of the presentation with background noise. After working remotely for close to a year already, we all know this can happen even if you try your very best. We tested this setup internally and it seems there's quite a lag between what we say and what you hear. So in case you have questions over the course of the webinar, it would be much better to use the Q&A system. Do you see the question mark icon on the top right corner of the screen? This is it. Questions will be reviewed at the middle and at the end of the presentation, excuse me, and answered to the best of our abilities in English et en français, bien entendu. We're beyond pleased to have you all here, and without further ado, the floor, or screen I guess, is yours, Fred.
You are muted, dear Fred.
Technology. I was saying thank you, Elsa, for the introduction. So welcome everyone to the second edition of Encore's quarterly webinar. I think I'll just get straight into it. I think it's now almost been a year here in Canada since we closed our borders. Definitely over a year since the first recorded case of COVID globally. So it goes without saying that, the travel industry pertaining to air, hotels, cars, any form of travel really has been largely affected by COVID, which itself is a virus that is transmitted through person-to-person contact or through proximity. Right, and there's really nothing like the travel industry that gets people closer, gets people more connected, and that really connects everyone and puts everyone together. So with that, it is no surprise that the air industry plays a big part, and it's a big player within the global economy. And with this webinar, I will show the impact of COVID on the travel industry and come up with what we've learned so far from the past year. And from those points, I will then extrapolate lessons to be learned on how companies can adjust, what to expect, and especially how to be ready for when travel restarts again. So going straight into it, I think when we started out, it's always great to get a macro level picture and overview of everything. And the travel industry right now comprises of millions of workers, approximately 330 million workers that account about 1/10 of the global workforce. Just on a global basis alone, they account for 10.3% of the GDP in 2019, in 2019 numbers. And looking further into business travel, since that's what Encore concentrates on most, business travel makes up 12% of passengers, but 75% of the profits for airlines. So it's a huge effect on how this industry will be shaped going forward. And just the size of the industry alone has a definite effect somewhere in how our lives will be shaped. And I think that's something that should never be discounted. So just to get an idea of one of the first things I wanted to look at was the willingness for persons to travel. And the first data point I looked at was to look at from the past year, how numbers have subsided in terms of cases and what was the impact of that on the overall increase in persons traveling. So what I was able to look at is the travel pattern of as a travel pattern chart of the percentage of the US population who had traveled throughout the past year. So this includes, long distance car travel, rail or air. And what I saw was that the number of cases versus the percentage of traveling was immediately negatively correlated, right? So throughout the summer, as cases lowered, we saw a high increase of travelers within the months of, let's say, June to September. And after dipping at its lowest point, even in April of last year to 19% of respondents saying they traveled, the share of Americans saying that they had traveled rose up a lot throughout August and September. Now, this is still a significant recovery, but nothing close to what we should expect from the past year. But there is a lesson to this, right? We saw that, for example, among the trips taken in August, 82% were for personal purposes and 18% were for business purposes. Now, the share for those business purposes are usually lower during these summer months, but this shows particularly something different because the share of business travelers grew a lot over the summer, right? So as businesses found a little leeway to get some things done, they took that opportunity, right? So what is interesting to note also is that in China, when you look at China, for example, which is ahead of the curve for the pandemic recovery, more than 70% of the COVID-19 travel sentiment respondents said that they expect to take their next leisurely trip before the end of 2020. So this is just a few months ahead of us, but it shows that the recovery should still be somewhat faster than we're expecting. So after I looked at this travel pattern, the next chart I looked at is a very interesting one, and it looks at the data of Latin American countries and how different approaches to containment of the virus are related to bookings for these nations. So we see that the highest negative percentage change year over year in net bookings between the first 2 weeks of October of 2020 versus the first 2 weeks of October in 2019 as a sample period. It shows that you had the largest negative percentage change for those that were completely closed off to foreigners, for those countries that had completely closed off the borders to foreigners. The next, you followed them up with those that required entry with quarantine. And then with more bookings expected for those who allow full entry with a negative COVID test, and then last followed by those that had no COVID related restrictions or requirements to entry. What this tells us is that testing pre-arrival or on arrival offers a promising way forward to restart air travel in the absence of a vaccine, if a government can be persuaded to use this to replace quarantine requirements, right? So bookings during the first 2 weeks of October for several Latin American markets show how the opening of borders with testing rather than quarantine can significantly boost travel. Now, once I got this information, next I looked at scenarios to find an instance where governments continue to keep a tighter leash on those who enter the country. For example, from those that currently require a 2-week or a 4 especially those that had high COVID rates, to quarantine for a period of 14 days upon arrival into the country. At the time, only passengers who arrived from a country that had a travel corridor, which is something that we'll discuss later, were exempted from going through this 2-week quarantine period. But towards the end of November, the UK put a new policy in place that was called test to release. So under this new framework, passengers could halt or stop any self-isolation given that they tested negative 5 days after entry into the UK. So the point of the test release program was to allow the period necessary for COVID to, show up in tests and for that period to pass. And if it showed up after those 5 days, then it would be tested as needed. But if it was negative after those 5 days, then the person would no longer need to isolate themselves or quarantine themselves from the general population. Now, what was not expected is that such a framework would have such a massive increase in the bookings that would be placed in the week following the announcement. So bookings from countries that were not part of the travel corridor and therefore would mandate a 14-day quarantine period increased about 101% in the following week, right? So the largest number of these bookings came from countries such as the US, Spain, India, France as the top origin countries. So going back to the point I want to reiterate is that there is a definite demand for travel regardless of the pandemic, but that the pandemic itself is only restricted by the quarantine measures currently put in place. So I don't want to say the pandemic, but the travel is restricted by the quarantine measures currently put in place by most governments. So we see time and time again spike in bookings every time any sort of governmental restriction is laxed or any policy is eased. So to put it all together, we've seen a growing body of evidence that people are desperate to travel. Maybe not desperate but eager. Okay, maybe actually I could be wrong. I'm sure many are desperate that an ease in government restrictions, what we know is that an ease in government restrictions could create a huge boost in the demand. So all of this translates to the business traveler in the sense that how quick we should expect travel to resume. It relates to how business is made, how interactions and deals can be performed, and how quick and important that face-to-face interaction becomes. So while there has been a reluctance to return to the office after COVID-related shutdowns, we see there is no such reluctance to hop on a plane for conferences or in-person meetings. This is due in large part to the clear advantage of conducting business interactions face-to-face. For instance, it's well known that there are various benefits to communicating in person, with even a simple handshake often crucial in making a bond with someone that underpins cooperation. So as a business traveler, the way you want travel to change in the future is that to facilitate this is that you want security fast lanes, you want spaced seating, you want pre-arranged seat selection, and you want any fast track immigration, right? The best adaptation to this new environment will be to get you through transit as quick as you can, as quick as possible, and to reduce any sort of time that might result in long lines or put you in crowded areas, right? And we should expect to see this as sort of the trend that's been happening in the past few years. Is we should expect this to translate to more and more automatization in the way we travel. So apart from what's valuable for the business traveler, we want to know, as a business traveler, you want to look at airlines which most accommodate this ever-changing environment. So what does that look like? A poll done by IATA in September 2020 took a look at the most important factors when choosing an airline. The highest ranking came from whether there are cancellation or change flexibility allowed, whether there were flexible ticket conditions, right? We've started to see this companies, we've seen companies that had hesitated before to allow some of this flexibility for tickets and now start to give refunds. For example, we'll look at American airlines such as United, Delta, which are no longer charging change fees indefinitely. The second most important factor that came out through this poll was whether an airline was taking special measures to enhance onboard hygiene. So for example, handing out masks, whether there was apparent sanitization efforts that were taking place, and whether overall it seemed, but not only seemed, but it was an actual practice that the airline took the passengers' safety and put it in front, right? And amongst other important factors were whether there were availability of direct flights. So again, we go back to that reduction of interactions that travelers would have amongst other people. And next was whether an aircraft or airline put in the effort to make sure that there were satisfactory sanitization levels in between different flights. So again, this is something to keep in mind, as a business manager, as a traveler, as a business traveler, as a leisure traveler, when deciding with whom to travel. And airlines have gone beyond that now, because I feel it should be the norm right now, with everybody sort of on edge about traveling again, is that airlines have sort of taken this step, but even have gone further, right? So airlines have come out with ingenious ways to go beyond these efforts and find ways to continue operating as much as they can. And one of the things that came out of this was what is called a travel corridor. Now, travel corridors are some of the creative ways that have come out of this COVID-19. So travel corridors are agreements between certain countries where passengers are allowed to travel and have comparatively minimal requirements of either quarantining or testing protocols. These travel corridors are a way to open up travel between business hubs or those that depend or have a need for tourist visits. So three things are generally required for a travel corridor to work. First, there needs to be an implementation or other requirement for a negative COVID test. So to test negative before you get to that destination, right? Proof is always needed. And some actually do on-the-spot rapid tests. Some airlines have facilitated that as well. Two, there needs to be a demand for flights between those two locations, typically two international locations. And three, there needs to be low infection rates between those regions or from the region by which the flights originate, right? So we've seen airlines such as Delta offering deals agreed by local governments to waive quarantine periods. if coming from certain locations, and having the requirement that they test negative for COVID-19. Some of these travel corridors, for example, include routes here such as between Atlanta and Rome, or let's say Amsterdam. The UK itself was a big user of these travel corridors, but with the new rise of this new strain in COVID-19 in the UK, all the travel corridors have currently been scrapped as of mid-January in the UK. So these are just some of the ways to sort of be updated. So as we go further, so what will the new adjustments look like? Well, for one, as we come out of this, there's probably expectation that you might travel for different reasons than before. Come up with reasons that, for example, you might initially travel to reestablish those connections that were initially lost. So getting in front of your clients to show some kind of continued partnership. For example, you might be visiting and traveling a lot plants for work that has been done in the past year. There could be a transition period where there is a need to check up on business procedures and how the company overall has been managing in these new times. This would result in the increase of business travel. So we should expect a huge boost in the beginning as companies feel more comfortable traveling again, to increase initially and then maybe level off and then increase again. Second, there's the resumption of a mix of business and leisure travel in company policies, right? Millennial travelers are especially keen on mixing business and pleasure. They often extend their corporate trip into a personal one. And this is even more true after COVID-19, when people who love to travel have been unable to do so. So these so-called leisure travelers, the mix between business and leisure, will naturally be more concerned about health and safety following the COVID-19 pandemic. And what will be important is to address questions around where the business insurance ends and their personal travel insurance begins. So that's something for companies to keep in mind. Next, while Zoom, for example, we've seen might be something that we've all gotten used to, whether through Teams meeting, even me hosting this webinar, just doing everything virtually. For many business people, there is nothing quite like seeing clients in person, right? Especially when building relationships or hashing out details of a sensitive deal or understanding how a business works from the inside. Even a simple handshake helps us create bonds, right? So there's a 2008 study from the University of Iowa, which found that the gesture of handshaking released oxytocin in the brain, in turn building trust between strangers and helping to sustain cooperation. More than that, it really often makes sense to invest in sending workers around the world. So another study from Oxford Economics found that every dollar spent on business travel resulted in $12.50 in incremental revenue, right? So this is again something that I think we should always keep in mind on how we think future traveler. I know a lot of times it's more negativity out there towards the sector, but the truth is that there's something about human nature that will not allow us to create that complacency and go back to a world that is less connected. So I wanted to take just a small breather to run a quick survey for all the attending participants, as I'm curious to get an idea of sort of what your sentiment is towards towards domestic travel, or how you think travel will look like in 6 months for yourself, and whether you think about travel. So if everyone could join me on slido.com, whether through your phone or your computer, and put in this code here, V978, or if you know how to work QR codes, scan the QR code. We can get an idea of sort of what your sentiment is towards domestic travel within the next 6 months. So I'll give you all some time to just go through that.
If I can add a little something, please just think about just returning to travel, not especially for professional reason, but also for personal reason as well. Like how confident do you feel like taking a plane at some point during the next 6 months? We'll leave you a couple of minutes to fill the survey, and we'll be right back with you. There's a lot of optimism going on. I like that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's moving.
It's interesting. We'll give it about 30 more seconds and then
yeah. Can the neutral votes, be more or less so that we can actually like define if it's slightly up or slightly down?
So this is interesting because it's great. It's good news that you're slightly optimistic, which is really in line with my own thoughts regarding travel, which is I'm really slightly optimistic that in the next 6 months, with the rollout of vaccines, that we should expect some sort of resumption. So the data right now, what it shows is that there's a current lag between vaccine efforts and the current bookings. So with the initial expectation was that you'd have as you get more vaccines and there's announcement of a vaccine being rolled out rises and more people are getting vaccinated, that you'd see the same impact of people making bookings. But the truth is, after a year, there is a slight hesitation. So there's a little bit of a lag that we see currently in the data. But the expectation should be that within the next few months, let's say after March, we should still see a relatively high increase in bookings as people become more comfortable with the realization that there might be normalcy starting back up again, right? And it's always a little bit that you need that little flick before things start going up a lot. And I think we should see that in the next, I say 2 or 3 months, where you will see the numbers of bookings being made, where people are going to start booking their summer vacations, thinking about getting in front of clients, seeing colleagues. So I like I really like the results of this, of what I'm seeing here, that people are slightly optimistic. It would be, I think, maybe a lot to ask that people feel too optimistic about it. Understandably, maybe people have some kind of trauma regarding the past year, and the fact that we kind of tend to pivot between in and out of lockdowns. We get into one, then we get out of one, then they put us back into the other. So I think this slightly optimistic is a result of some hesitation on our past history, which is sort of what this webinar is about, creating lessons from what we've already been through. So this is great. So now that we kind of understand.
Can I add a little something, Fred, before you go ahead with the rest? I wanted to thank you to participate into the survey. I'm also very happy to see that slightly optimistic. The only thing I would like to add was more, if you were thinking about a professional trip that would be willing to happen over the next 6 months, I guess the little slight or the balance between the slightly optimistic or slightly unlikely was more due to the fact that we still do not know when offices will open, when restaurants will open. You can travel domestically today to meet your clients or meet your vendors, but where? You will not invite yourself at their homes. So waiting for the offices to be back, populated, I would say, or restaurants at least, or like gathering environment, that will stay unlikely to happen. And if you were more thinking about the leisure side and going to the south because it's winter, we all have snow outside of the window, I just wanted to mention that little thing that made me very having a big laugh, but on a good way. And I wanted to thank you. I don't know if we have our friends from WestJet on the call today, but they implemented it all-inclusive, including your PCR test at the hotel at your destination. So that's a rare definition of the all-inclusive package that you can buy these days. And thank you for thinking about that, because as Fred mentioned before, the airlines are more than willing to adapt and to create and to be very innovative to keep their clients happy and confident to travel again. So this is also coming from that kind of examples. And on that note, I'll let you continue, Fred.
And also, speaking on where to meet your clients, you could like enhance like an at-home, before you get into my house COVID test. You know, you're going to meet your clients at home.
Yeah.
So with the aviation industry and sort of how it's been performing, you know, regarding business travel, we need to understand what the players in business travel that will be helping the recovery. And the segments of business travel that are likely to return first is looked at through the type of travel, the reasoning behind this travel, and the industry in which the travelers will work. So first, the first and earliest group of travelers will be those that will be in a rented vehicle or a personal vehicle, that they will be traveling for sales, or client meetings, looking to make business that is quick and under a certain goal, most likely in the sales department. This first group of people will feel more comfortable in close proximity settings, which makes the traveler feel more in control. And then with within this first group of people in relation to the industry, within this first group of people, the first industry more likely to recover will be, to go back to travel, will be the construction, the manufacturing, which are the first industries really likely to put their workers back to more or less pre-COVID routines. The next group of travelers will be those that will be traveling domestically, whether through air or train. And the reason for traveling is most likely to be due to training programs they need to partake in, small gatherings, as well as possible internal meetings that cannot be accommodated virtually. In the same instance, the next few major industries that will be the next in going back to normal work procedures after the initial two that I mentioned would most likely be the finance sector, the real estate industry, as well as the tech and energy industry. They tend to be very customer centric with a need for movement to conduct business, to finalize, I should say, business. Finally, the third group of travelers are most likely to be those that are traveling internationally. We expect international travel to resume last, just due to the complexity between each country and their respective laws and regulations regarding how they deal with COVID. And the reasoning for traveling for this group of people will be to attend conferences, to attend big events and exhibitions, to attend more large-scale meetings that can not be done virtually. And with this last group, the last also few industries that are most likely to catch up will be industries such as the education sector in terms of traveling, as well as the healthcare sector, and lumped into this are other professional services. Like I said, our international travel will take longer to rebound because of the complexity of government regulations, mandatory requirements, and the high risk of fast-changing policies. So examining next the purpose for travel, other than for mission-critical use cases, travel for sales and client-related meetings will really be the first to quickly resume, and that's something I feel some clients are even doing now. Again, as Elsa said, the only thing that's sort of restricting is, where do you meet these clients? Where do you conduct these meetings? And that's been sort of the thing that's keeping a lot of travel from happening. Conversely, sales-focused organizations have expressed that, that urgency to meet face-to-face, right? With the understanding that doing so will require both parties, of course, to be comfortable with the travel required. So now, whether client offices will reopen to workers and allow guests will be a major indicator of the likelihood of that type of travel returning. again, I think it goes without saying that, in terms of competition, once a certain company begins these sales meetings, it's not hard to imagine that the competitors or peers will be quick to react amidst this increased pressure to get your business in front of some of these key customers. So what we did internally ourselves is also look at our charts in terms of to get an idea of what we expect internally of how air travel bookings will look like. So what we did was look at hotels, and the next section to look at hotels globally. Right now, we see that hotels are at a 39% occupancy compared to a 72% over the same year. In 2019, in the hotel segment section, we looked at three very important metrics, right? The first is occupancy rate, the second is the daily rate, and the third is revenue per available room. These metrics let us know the cost to hotels and as well as the traffic that's going through these hotels. Now, it shows that 2020 we saw a reduction in pretty much all of these three metrics. The expectation is, however, that we should still see a slight resumption in all of these between this year and next year. Some of these even reaching 2019 levels by 2022. Now, this data will obviously be changing given time and how quick, given if there's no new strains of COVID that keeps popping up or how quick we can adjust to these new strains, that will obviously relate to the recovery of this sector. What's interesting though is that what you see is at one point occupancy rate is moving up much faster than the average daily rate. Now, this is not something that we typically see. Usually it moves one-to-one in demand, right? Between the demand and the rates, they usually move in a unison direction. But with this, what we see that at one point the occupancy rate and demand will be higher than the rate increases. This will be a great time for companies right now to think about the future, to think about locking in some of those rates, some of those corporate rates, to capture the low rates right now, in the assumption that in the long term, low prices will be there in the short term, but that you might get more volatile and maybe much higher prices in the long term as companies sort of adjust to the new efforts and the costs that come with making sure that their facilities are safe. So next, I wanted to look at sort of the biggest takeaways around business travel. And, the biggest takeaway I think should be that if you go something is that business travel will most likely return much faster than is being presented in the market. We've seen tremendous evidence that shows that there's an eagerness to go back to this interaction, and that it will really depend on how quick companies and corporations can adjust and make new policies surrounding travel. Another thing is that COVID-19 will bring definite changes in how companies plan and view corporate travel. And last is that airlines are going to be quick to adjust to the needs of their customers. We've already seen this in the way airlines deals with cancellation and changes in tickets. The price discounted they're currently offering for certain destinations, as an example. So as a traveler, again, this is very good news that things will turn around quick. Now, regarding changes internally for companies, one of the things is that it will be important to create strong mechanisms around defining and authorizing essential business travel. So how is this decided? Who owns the final decision? In many companies, questions on business travel has fallen between the cracks of job roles, but I expect that in the future, it will be a much more defined process, and that there will be sole responsibility or ownership that will be necessary to meet employee expectations and protect brand liability. What the lockdown has done is that it's made organizations realize the effectiveness of engaging through this virtual collaborative platforms. And so companies now are sort of mindful of their travel spends. So again, virtual meetings have limitations, but in some instances, they really will be the new norm for some companies. So regarding defining essential travel, we'll see more firms employing travel managers or creating new corporate assistance schemes to ensure that right decisions are made and that employees are protected. Companies will look at factors such as psychological health risk and physical well-being, as well as the destination risks, including local healthcare standards and any anticipated government response should more outbreaks occur. We'll see that the well-being of the business traveler will not be allowed to come second to price, as research already suggests that 39% of business travelers have suffered some lack of sleep and felt mental health impact as a result of frequent business travel. So to put this together, really a more robust focus on traveler health and security can only really be a good thing. So what is a call to action for these businesses is to create a strategy and process to define essential travel for your company and make a clear definition on on a structure for ownership for these kinds of decisions. Next will be, again, that mix between that leisure travel, where you should expect that they will be asking more questions around where business travel insurance ends and personal travel insurance begins. Businesses must have more clarity around what's covered and what isn't, from not only a monetary but also a protection perspective. This information should be accessible for all employees, and the business should be able to show that their health and safety and well-being of the employee is very important anytime they're abroad. Right, so businesses should ensure that there is no middle ground when it comes to where business and leisure travel begins, and to make those distinctions clear for all employees in the whole business. Next is a change in duty of care. A survey by Collinson found that while half of business travelers say their employee has invested in medical and security assistance to support them, 51% of those aren't sure what it means or the offers what they are. So you need to be very, employees need to be apprehensive about the use of travel assistance and support that they signed up for, and to making sure that the employees have more confidence in assistance in the event that something could go wrong while abroad. Now, as Encore, we offer a similar product called Encore Security, where travelers will have access to up-to-date destination-based information, any sort of relevant and timely travel risk advisories, as well as tracking of your travelers throughout your whole business trip. They'll have a safe and panic button functionality, which will also be able to connect to a medical assistance provider, as well as the app will also have some pre-trip advisories. So if you're looking at if this is something you're interested in, I think you should contact one of the account managers, something that Encore offers for the safety of your travelers while on their business trip. So just going back, so while it's great news that so many employers have signed up to this medical and security assistance, there needs to be more action needed for staff to realize the full potential of these services. Especially with post-COVID-19, business travelers will be looking to their employers and travel providers for clarity around how they are being protected. Last, as a return to, this normalcy kind of goes back, it'll be very important that companies are up to date with hygiene measures, that they always survey any occurring diseases, that they're up to date with rules while still allowing international travel. So in this period, businesses will need to always make sure that they're up to date with the advisory measures that their employees receive. Whether it's something small such as making sure to always recommend to wear a face mask when visiting certain countries, or a reminder to leave more time for airport security and screening, because without a doubt, the way you used to go through an airport pre-COVID-19 will not be the same post-COVID-19, right? It will not be the same. And so as this vaccine is being rolled out, which, I think most has shown that there should be some kind of normalcy, at least in North America by September of this year, businesses should still continue to learn from COVID-19 experience and be more prepared for adverse events and what that could impact and how it could impact their corporate travel. The question will always be how to balance comfort of your employees, their experience in safety while traveling, and always making sure you're prepared for these ongoing conversations. So as we go through this transition period, those who take the opportunity to position themselves during these cloudy days will be better for it as we process and as we get out of this last year and out of this ongoing situation with COVID-19. So if anyone really has a question, thank you so much for everyone for attending. And if anyone have a question, please let me know. I think also, if there are any, please shoot them my way, and I'm more than happy to answer them.
Yes, thank you very much, Fred. I'm actually I opened the live event Q&A. There is no question there. So now is the time, should you wonder about an event or an item in particular that you would like us to comment on. If you have some feedback about the session in itself, just please go ahead. This is the right time to do so. Other than that, I also wanted to mention that as the first webinar that we had, we will make sure to provide you with a written summary of that event so that you can keep some key numbers and key highlights of that webinar at hand on your desk, or share with your colleagues that couldn't attend the webinar. And then, so the recording of the session will be available online from a link that will be shared at the next newsletter that we'll send in next week. Yeah, I was about to say in 2 weeks, but I think it's next week. So still no question. I guess that will end the session. That was very clear. I guess if there is no
I hope
question.
that's what it speaks to, and that nobody goes away with more questions than answers than they came in with.
Exact. Yeah. So thank you very much for your attendance. Merci beaucoup d'avoir participé à ce webinaire avec nous. On a été très heureux de vous accueillir. We're very happy to have you with us today. And we'll see you in about 3 months or something like that for new news, the third wave eventually, or some good stats on the return to travel. Merci beaucoup et passez une excellente journée.